name is Trisha Wright, and I am a part of Big Cat's 2019 spring cohort. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the multi-hyphenated panel, and we have a lot of insight that we're going to give you guys today. And we have the wonderful Amir and Taylor with us. And before I bring them on, just want to talk to you a little bit more about the week and what's to come in this broadcast. So all week long, BayCat is hosting a conference that's going to spotlight various diverse creatives throughout this discussion. We hope that we provide you a lot of industry tools and also be able to help any new creatives that are trying to get started in the industry. And with events like this, we have to have a lot of help from our community and from our sponsors. So with that, I would like to thank our sponsor this evening, Dolby Laboratories, for supporting In Focus. Now for tonight's panel, we are going to be talking with creative freelancers, as I mentioned, Amir and Taylor. And Amir, he's going to talk a little bit more about himself shortly, but he is a photographer and videographer based out of Oakland. And Taylor is interested in pop culture and political writing. And I think with that, we can probably get into their introduction so they can talk a little bit more about themselves. So Amir, if you could start us off.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Baycat, and our sponsor. My name is Amir Aziz. Like you mentioned, I'm a photographer, videographer here in Oakland. Born and raised in Oakland, still fighting here to stay in Oakland. I freelance photography and videography as well as have a part-time job in broadcast television. So it allows me to work enough to freelance, and freelance offers me enough time and work to do work in part-time in broadcast. So here I am today to discuss that with you guys.
Thanks, Amir. And Taylor, if you can also talk about a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Hey y'all. So my name is Taylor Crumpton. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a proud Southern Black queer friend from Dallas, Texas. I've been out here in the Bay for about 2 years. Actually, June 28th will be 2 years in the Bay. So I've officially lived here longer than my previous home, which was Philadelphia. I love Philly. And I started as a news and politics contributor for Teen Vogue in 2017. So my first initial beat was doing a lot of features with elected officials, as well as doing some news reporting on a lot of data we were getting about on the think tanks, where I really developed my love of reporting specifically about the Black community and really about Black women. But after a year and a half in the news and politics space, I transitioned into music and culture, which is my beat now. So from Teen Vogue, now I regularly contribute to sites kind of like Uprocks, Vice, and Vibe. I've kind of integrated culture writing because I think there's a lot of things in which you can explore that intersect along with music in the culture space. So I recently left my full-time job as a social worker in the Tenderloin with homeless youth. A lot of people talk mess about the TL. I love the TL. So now I am freelancing full-time to work on my passion project, which is a book proposal about the history of hip hop in my hometown in Dallas. So I'm really excited to kind of explore my journey, talk about it with all of y'all. Where I'm proudly wearing my Meg Thee Stallion shirt and drinking from a Don't Mess with Texas mug, so you already know what it is. But yeah, excited to tap in.
That's great. Don't mess with Texas, basically. So for tonight, we are going to be going through this conversation with a lot of questions that were curated from BayCat, as well as some of the submitted questions from the viewers at home. And so I wanted to start off this conversation talking a little bit more about how you guys started your journey with freelancing, and also you could identify like the specific types of work and projects that you've been on. I know, Taylor, that you mentioned a little bit about your beat now, talking about with writing for music. So if you could just talk about some of the projects that you've currently been working on and like just the type of overall that you like working on.
Yeah, of course. So when I started my freelancing journey, it's funny because it was very unexpected. At the time in 2016, I was a undergraduate student, but also an abortion rights organizer because during that year, we had a case heard at the Supreme Court. It was Whole Woman's Health. It's the most significant Supreme Court case about abortion since Planned Parenthood. So part of the organizing that I was doing was part of digital. So using a lot of social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, just to really share the stories that were coming out of West Texas because we were so far removed from the metropolitan areas that the only way to uplift our stories was through the use of social media. And I was a part of a fellowship called Young People For, in which they taught fellows how to write op-eds. So I had written this op-ed about my experience on campus in which a woman had offered me a DIY abortion as I was leaving my ex-boyfriend's apartment. And that was something that was very common being had in the area. And I was sitting on this op-ed for a while, and at the time, the editor in chief of Glamour was just on Twitter. And I'm someone who really loves Twitter. People have probably RSVP'd because I literally tweeted "We Live Baby" on Twitter as this was happening. Um, and I tweeted at her and was like, "Hey, like, can I pitch to you?" And she was like, "Yeah, sure." So I just really just shoot my shot, and like I made it in. Now looking back, it's wild that my first byline was in Glamour when I was untrained, didn't go to J school, and like 20 years old. Um, but from that experience, I like did a couple of like fellowships doing journalism, but they were all in like the nonprofit advocacy space. So Young People For, Urge was this Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equity. But after Trump's election that happened my senior year of undergrad, I felt drawn to write an op-ed. And that was when Teen Vogue was kind of starting to be known as the brand it is today when they're talking about like radical politics and interviewing elected officials. So I kind of snuck in like right at that sweet spot. And I was very blessed at the time to had an editorial staff that taught me the basics of journalism. So it was like J school, but free. So I started off in like the news beat, which is like all the stories where it's just like I think my first story was like an 11-year-old girl in Florida fought an alligator because her like hand got like just the stories that like you need to be put out there but really aren't like that enjoyable to write. But I was just honored to write for a major publication. And the news writing gave me the foundation to enter politics writing because it's different when you're sitting with a politician and you're asking them about their platform. And luckily, by that time, I had left undergrad and gone to grad school. I went to grad school at the University of Pennsylvania, where I went to the policy school. So I was able to do kind of like an intersection of what I was studying to what I was reporting. And I carried that with me until I moved out in the Bay in 2018. And to be honest, kind of like what we're seeing right here, I just experienced a lot of burnout and compassion fatigue from always having to write about like the tragedies that were happening in the Black community. So as I always do, I tweeted and I literally said verbatim, "Can someone please hire me to write about music? I'm tired about writing about white supremacy." And one of my first editors at Vibe asked me to contribute to their end of the year list for 2018. And since then, I think I've contributed to over 50 platforms, some in music, some in culture. I really love hip hop. It's one of my first love languages. It's something that really fuels me at night and what's helping get me through the treacherousness of a book proposal. But yeah, I'm really honored that in my non-traditional route, I've been able to have cultural critic acclaim by Jack Jones Literary Arts, by BBC Culture. I feel like I'm forgetting one, but it's also 740. So yeah, that's kind of the route to my being a multi-hyphenated freelancer right now.
And I think that's really good to also touching on that right now of how it's a certain route that we have to take to get to where we want to be with our craft. And we're going to talk about that a lot more later. So if you can just bring a little bit more of what you went through, personal experiences, we could definitely get into that as the conversation moves forward. But Amir, if you can also talk about the specific projects that you work on, if there's a certain genre or style of art that you like to create.
Yeah. So with photography in particular, I've always been interested in documentary, kind of what's happening now without it being too set up or studio like. And it's been a preference for me, just as someone who's in a big family. My father used to have a video camera, and I remember as a child him always shooting us and getting those, small moments and us growing up. And I remember this one video with my youngest sister, no, my second to middle sister. I have four sisters. The one that's right over me, and it was her kindergarten graduation, and we watched that video until the video was destroyed. We just really loved being able to watch home movies and have this feeling of watching something in the past, and that really took, I think, I got an inspiration from that to document what's going on, to be able to view it later, kind of like an archive of Black family. And I've looked back on those now with really fond memories, especially since my father has passed. So I kind of think of that time and those spaces of, I live in Oakland, we did it going down Grand with motorcycles. But I really look at that time as like what inspired me to kind of continue the legacy of archiving family. And I bought my first camera at 18. And I remember because I bought it on eBay. It was a Nikon D500. And the morning it came was the general strike protest um, nationwide. So I took that camera to the protest that went to the Port of Oakland. And some of my first images are actually shooting protests. So it's funny now, we'll probably talk about this later, now shooting protests, what's going on with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. It's kind of the same work that I've been doing like this whole time, kind of just wrapped around. But since then, I started to put my work up more. It was wanting to document and archive online. And at 18, I wasn't really thinking in the sense of, oh, like I want to be published. I want to be someone who's well known for this. This was just what I felt like was a dedication to me and my people. But eventually, because of our community here, people would see the work. They would ask me to shoot their events. And it just got so consistent. It was like, okay, maybe I should charge for something. And I think some of my first shoots for events, music events, were something really low, like $50 or something. And just to be there, just to do it. And I started to learn more about the process and the business. And continue with documentary, and that's still like the area I'm in. I've done a few other areas. I've been to a wedding and took some pictures there. I've done some portrait work. I've taken photos for music, artwork, etc. But I think documentary is really the stronghold for my biggest passion, and
That's
that's
awesome.
photography.
Also, I know that you guys kind of touched on it before that as freelancers, we have a lot of gigs that we probably aren't interested in or just like helps us get to where we are now. But what is the one gig or the one project that you are most proud of? And Amir, I'll throw that to you first.
Sure. Most proud, I'd say recently, I think it was actually last year. I have a homie now who's from Toronto named Joseph Adamu, and he has this brand called Sunday School. It's an agency where they do creative work, and he himself is Black, believes Nigerian, so kind of elevates the Black narrative in his imageries and his campaigns. And he was coming to Oakland, and we have a mutual friend named Bianca in New York City that connected us, and he was coming out here to do a show actually with Visco. Uh, Visual supply company here in Oakland, and he was looking for someone to collaborate with and kind of produce like a smaller project of the work he was going to show at Visco. So our mutual friend Bianca, she put us together, and we linked up. We had some food, and we talked about like our love for photography, our love for Black people, what kind of creative work we do, and we kind of had a lot of similar goals and ideas with what we want to see in the world. So he had this idea to come up with a smaller campaign of the one he was going to show to kind of promote around Oakland. And like I mentioned, I kind of was in a producer role, so I'm looking for like locations. I'm looking for who's going to be involved, like what kind of aesthetic we're looking for, what's the location, um, and I ended up utilizing just really my family and friends. The subjects of the photography uh, ended up being my nieces, my two nieces, and we used a friend of mine's house in Daly City because he had this really like 70s gold aesthetic, and that was really powerful for me because, like I mentioned, with the family oriented, it allowed me to pull in my family and to pull in the people close to me to produce some work that really had a very impactful meaning um, for everybody. And it helped promote the show that he ended up having at Visco. And at the show, actually, so many people were asking about that small promo work. It almost made it like it had its own show here in Oakland prior to the show that he brought. So it was great to bring people in that are really dear and close to me, and um, my nieces are amazing. So I'm glad to bring them in and be that uncle that does projects that they can be involved with and see me doing it firsthand. So that meant a lot.
Yeah, I think like no matter how much our career progresses and how many accolades or like how much our work is shown, I think especially being family oriented, like having the ones that like helps bring you up, having projects with them are really going to be meaningful.
Definitely.
And Taylor, with you, if you can talk a little bit more about a project that you really admire that was really memorable.
Yeah, I think the best way to start this is by taking a sip out of my Texas mug because it's about my home state.
Oh, of course.
So actually, last year I was contacted by an editor at Marie Claire to do a reported piece about this campaign that happened in Harris County, which is where Houston is located at, about this historic election of 19 Black women judges. They all ran together under the hashtag Black Girl Magic Texas. As we know, Houston at the time was the second most diverse city in America. Now it is the most diverse city in America. So just kind of based on the changing demographics of what was happening in Houston and in Texas overall, especially in the 2016 presidential election, the National Democratic Party was very much watching and invested in this campaign because, as we know, Black women are the foundation of the Democratic Party. So it was a beautiful meddling of my kind of experience as a politics reporter, me using my degree for my policy school, as well as uplifting the community that I love so much. So that piece took months of revisions and edits, and it was very impactful for me as a freelancer because I was trained in digital media and this was for print. So there's two expectations of you writing an article that can go up on a site and then you writing an article that has to go into publication. And the kind of like the sweet overall moment about this is that it was published for their May issue of 2019, but I was actually flying back home April 2019 because I made a promise to my college best friend that no matter where I moved, I would fly back home to see her. So I had like one of those corny moments where I was like, let me go see like if it's in the like the bookstore in the airport. Like y'all are from the base, like I was in SFO and it's that one right after security. So I'm like going, I'm looking around. I see the magazine. I like flip open to it. And then my Venus is in Leo. So I just start bawling like in front of like this international airport in front of all these people right before my flight to like Dallas to go home. And like the lady comes up to me and she's like, are you okay? And I'm like, this is my first print piece, like this is my name. Like I think it was just one of those signifiers that a lot of times as freelancers, especially freelancers of color and Black freelancers, when you do a untraditional career field, you don't receive that much support from your family and friends. They may think it's a side gig and you're trying to make it into something that you can actually like contribute and live off of.
Wow.
So the lady congratulated me and I was like, can I have the magazine? And she was like, no, you have to pay for it. And I was like, but my name's it's in the magazine, so why? So that was like one moment, and then that day was emotional because when I landed in Dallas, I got a bunch of texts from my friends saying congratulations, and I was like, not all of y'all could have seen my video, and that was the day I saw that I was also tagged as a pop culture critic on Jack Jones Literary Arts, like right next to like Hannah Gorgas from the Atlanta and Jenna Wortham for the New York Times. So in typical fashion, I broke down in tears again, but I was just back home in Dallas with my best friend instead of one of the most trafficked airports in the United States.
Well, at least you have the comfort at home this time instead of being at probably what Hudson, the Hudson newsstand, probably. I think that's what it
Yep,
is.
it was the Hudson newsstand, everyone.
Well, you guys definitely started talking more about like your background of how you became like with family orientation and how like they can bring you up and like just the homegrown aspect of becoming a creative. If you could talk about more technically, like the path that you took to become a creative. And I know Taylor, you mentioned a little bit about it before, but if you can just like talk about probably within the last, I would say like for when you like switch to your beat now that you do with print.
Yeah, of course. So when I started as a contributor to Teen Vogue, they literally brought me on maybe 2 weeks before I graduated from college. So that was kind of exciting because I was like, yeah, I'm going to grad school, but I also write for Teen Vogue. Different story. So I continued writing from undergrad into grad school into my first professional job where I was a social worker in the Tenderloin. So I was blessed in that position when I was working that I didn't have to hustle as hard as I did push myself because I really switching beats. There is a distinctive style to every type of writing. So politics writing is different from news, it's different from music, it's different to culture. And I told myself when I entered music and culture that I was willing to even accept lower rates because I had a full-time job at the time. And for my first year out here, I lived with my dad, so I was able to supplement rent. Now I live by myself, so it's different as a full-time freelancer where I'm constantly having gigs and having to keep up. But the good thing about the position I'm in now is that I have a Virgo moon, so I love planning out things. So I told myself if I'm going to transition into full-time freelancing in May, then 6 months prior, I need to reduce my spending, my eating out, my love of tattoos, all of those things that I can live without, just so when I enter this space, right? And I didn't think to incorporate a global pandemic right now that really
Oof, yes.
negative impacted the music and entertainment scene because we're seeing the cancellation of festival season and album releases and all these things that music journalism is really centered around. But the good thing is that for years I had developed strengths in other beats, so I'm able to do politics writing, right? I'm able to still go and do news. So right now, as a full-time freelancer, I have a bit of a nest egg so I can be a little bit selective with projects, especially right now when a lot of publications are looking for Black women to write these obituaries. And based on my lived experience with police violence and how close the victims are in my age and gender, I can't do that. And I understand that's a privilege because back in the day when I was a first contributor, those are the stories I really wrote, but those kind of gave me the influences of how I want to engage right now. Um, but yeah, full-time freelancer shorty.
That's awesome. So, Amir, I know you talked about it briefly, how you came into documentary film. I know a lot of people, especially start off like in photography and videography, just like doing it because, you know, social media is so big right now. Like in some way, everybody's a content creator. So how did you switch from just doing it from personal to making a career out of it?
How I switched from personal to career. I would say confidence. Like I mentioned, starting out, I wasn't really charging a lot. I didn't have peer review or any type of contrast to make between what I was doing and what people in the industry were doing. I didn't have many contacts at the time, and so my confidence wasn't really as high to start charging enough to make a living. And so I started exploring in media, actually industry jobs. So not to just be a freelancer, but to explore being a staff at whether it be an agency, whether it be a production company or something like that. So at Youth Radio, now called YR Media, shout out to YR people watching from there. They had this program, and you can be a pathways program. They typically have their match core and bridge for like high school youth, but by the time I got there, I was 19. So again, this is like right after I'm deciding photography is a thing. So at 19, I started going there and kind of just hanging out because I wasn't really young enough to be in the program, but they told me like, hey, stick around. Like we're about to start a 19 to 24, I think it was, program. And they started the program eventually. I think I was 20 and I got into the program. I ended the program, and at the end of the program, you get an internship or an externship. And the externship I chose was an advertising agency called Carol H. Williams. And that is a Black woman owned advertising agency. She has a deep history in advertising, an amazing woman. She's still there, still doing it, CEO and CCO. So I went there, I was an intern, and I learned everything I could about being in a business sense for media and creativity. I was getting my pitches ripped apart. I was making calls. I was having it on a platform that was really huge. So I got to see it from the background and see kind of like what the end goal would look like if I were to pursue this as a full-time gig. And for that experience, it kind of gave me the confidence that, oh, these are experiences I can have if I continue to do it, and I want to be in this area for real. Just to put it plainly, like doing it for real. Like you can do it like just cause, but to do it for real looks like this to me at the time. So like I was working with clients like ARP and YMCA and Union Bank, and I was landing these pitches, and it was just beat after beat after beat for me, and I was just like, okay, this is it. And I ended up being brought on as an associate art director, or junior art director, as they call it in advertising, and that just kept the momentum going. I stayed there for a couple of years, and once I left there, I decided, okay, what's the thing I'm gonna choose? And at the time, I was thinking like I had to choose one thing, because if you're hyphenated, like you're doing this, whatever the term is, like you're not utilizing 100% of your battery. There's like this book called The One Thing. And it's like you have 100% battery, but you want to spread yourself out too thin. You don't want to be a jack of all trades, master of none. So I was really like, what am I gonna do? And I decided I'm gonna keep being multi-hyphenated because I can do all the things I'm interested in well. But just having a narrow focus on what they mean to me ended up being my conclusion. So with photography and filmmaking and art direction, it became, I want to utilize storytelling. I want to tell narratives in my community, in Black communities, and for future uh, Black people that will read these stories and watch these stories and hear these stories in the past about what's going on, about what lives we lived in today. And therefore, it just kept me in this multi-hyphenated, like I can utilize photo and video with the same equipment now, that we might not have been able to do maybe 20 years ago. So I think it becomes a little easier to be multi-hyphenated when, like you mentioned, with content creation, uh, you can be that and be good at them all and not have to worry about choosing one uh, and being only good at that to get gigs. But there's people who hit me up for art direction only, and actually who know that I only do that. There's people who hit me up particularly for filmmaking. And right now with photography, I've been in the photojournalism lens because of just bad pun. With photojournalism because of what's been going on, and it's just bringing me back into like the documentary stuff, and so that just got me to where I am now with that. So it allowed me to be multi hyphenated without sacrificing the thought that I might not get as much work if I don't focus on one thing.
Mhm. And that's a good transition to basically, you guys touched on it a little bit with, to put it simply, we going through it right now. So just
Yeah,
social
yeah.
climate and just with the pandemic right now. If you can talk about, I know Amir, I saw that you had your work um, displayed in an article about photographers in Oakland, basically going to the protests and taking pictures and archiving that. So if you can just talk about the importance of why you decided to use your platform and be able to document such a important time of our history.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier too, like the very first thing I shot was a protest, so it's kind of been embedded in me. I've been to other countries and shot protests. I've been to Hong Kong and shot protests. I've been to France and shot protests. So utilizing the platform to share the struggles people are going through worldwide is kind of what I was already in. But then now that there's this worldwide focus on Black lives and all Black lives, I think there's a elevated importance from me personally to not only share what's going on, but to share a perspective coming from me, which I've been actually kind of uh, wary about sharing like personal views because you want to be neutral, but this is really hitting home. And I've been having a lot of conversations and personally growing with knowing how to show up for other people during this time. And there's there's just a lot going on, and
Mhm.
I think with like I said, I think there's just an elevated importance from me and from the heart really that makes me focus on telling these narratives and sharing them from a humanitarian sense. And from Oakland in particular, like we've dealt with police violence for a long time, and um, our police department's actually federally regulated and has been for some years now. So like we're no stranger to police and state sponsored terrorism, but
Mhm.
there's still a beauty within how we do what we do and how we continue to grow and push through that. Um, it's the essence of what I do and how and why I do it. So my platform is always that. It's always going to be that, no matter what no matter what skill set I'm using, no matter what um, tools I'm using to tell those stories.
And I think it's really important and good too to be able to continue to do that, especially now, because we see that a lot of the stuff that we're capturing in the streets isn't being shown on traditional news sites and only being in social media. And with that, I wanted to switch to Taylor to talk about more from the writing perspective on how a lot of traditional news and just student journalism in general, how like sometimes there's a divide, and how right now, if you're partaking in any activism towards the movement going on right now and trying to get your perspective out there.
Yeah, so as I briefly hinted in my introduction, I was an abortion rights organizer in West Texas. And the unique thing about abortion rights organizing is that it has always been plagued with violence directly towards the organizers as well as the medical professionals. I'm reminded about when the case was being heard at the Supreme Court, and I was one of the speakers featured outside. And I was only 19 at the time, and there was a bunch of like pro-life people there, and then there was the speakers. And at the age of 19, all of us had to have a bulletproof vest on because there's a lot of documented violence around people who were organizing abortion rights in the South and the Midwest, traditionally not on the coast. In addition to doing that abortion rights organizing work, I was doing a lot of work around equity for Black students on my college campus, which was Abilene Christian University. It has a marker as one of the most conservative colleges in the United States of America. So while I was at the age of 19, I was getting death threats sent to my house, and my car was being vandalized. It became very unsafe for me to do that type of work. which is why I started transitioning into doing more of digital organizing, which eventually led me into journalism. And at this current moment, what I have been using my platform for has been trying to release accessible information about radical foundational text. So I have a background in facilitating abolition workshops, reformative justice, transformative justice, because I think something right now is that with people who have trauma from being out on the front line and direct, they can't be there in a physical sense, but I'm figuring out other ways in which we can still relay that information, whether it's mutual aid funds, whether it's doing a lot of education. I think right now what we're seeing and what we've learned from so many disability activists who can't traditionally go out into the field is that there's still a place for everybody in the movement. And specifically for Black media people, we have always known the kind of undue burden that we also have to have when it comes to events like what's going on now, when we're coming to events in which our communities are yet again being terrorized for state violence, which has been an inherent truth to this nation since 1619. So I've been very blessed to be in community with a lot of Black reporters that have either been on the ground, those who are investigating the appearance of mutual aid funds, and are they going directly to the organizers on the ground? I think there's a lot of ways in which Black media is being hypercritical, number one, about how traditionally, CNN and a lot of major corporations have vilified and demonized and always focused on broken windows and pushing back against that. And I really have to be thankful for the emergent journalists that came out of Ferguson, like Wesley Laurie, who kind of set the found book of what it means for a Black journalist to not be objective, to insert their views, right? Because there is a value to that. And I think newsrooms try to preach this very overarching objectivity principle, which is still based in the maintenance of having a white newsroom, right? A white newsroom that emulates all of the white structures of society. So I think to be a Black person in media is to inherently push against those ideas that you cannot insert yourself in the newsroom, that you cannot insert your political views in those things, because so many people trust us because of our voices. I think something for me in particular is my non-traditional route came from Twitter, came from a social media platform. So the way in which I engage with my audience is through live and constant feedback and engagement. So even if I'm not being commissioned for a piece, right, I'm still able to be in conversation with people in the ground. I'm still able to uplift what recently happened on Sunday with Dream Defenders Sunday School, right? And I think I take a lot of pride in being able to digest a lot of complex theories and have layman's conversations, right? That's why I went to policy school, was to be able to kind of regurgitate this information that is put in terms that you need at least two degrees to understand, or a lived experience, or come from a traditional white political background, because policy, media, all these things should be as digestible to someone who is experiencing homelessness on the street. And if us as people in media, as people who look up to, cannot relay that information to someone who maybe has not gone the traditional form around of education, then I think we really have to take a look within ourselves to realize what is the purpose and how am I serving my community. So at this current time, even though I'm not directly out in the field because of the trauma that I have, and that's valid and affirmed, I'm still finding a way to give back in my unique sense. So I'm glad that we're kind of transitioning into that acceptable framework.
Exactly. Yeah. And I know like a lot of what you said transitions beautifully into what I want to talk about next, of being not just overall the general question of how to get work in the industry, starting out freelancing, but also some of the difficulties that you might find, or just some of the challenges that you might have to might have to go through being a Black creative. So if you could touch a little bit more about that, Taylor.
Yeah, of course. So I feel like I'm being an unofficial spokeswoman for Twitter right now, because I love the platform. It's terrible. But so many gigs surprise me. I'm a big person who believes in manifestation. I can look back now and see tweets where I'm like, someone please hire me to write about Solange. She's putting out a Texas album. I'm from Texas. I know Solange. Please let me write this. And then I look, and within 24 hours, a music editor is like, hey, I saw you want to write about Solange. Um, let's have a conversation. And I've been surprised more than usual to get that. But I also know that's because I spent 1.5 years in a news and politics week where no one was really looking at my work, laying the foundation, and then also being in communication with people about my work, right? I think a journalist can really make a news story that may be very plain on paper, very exciting and engaging, the way you pull quotes with it, the way you interact with people with it, right? Right now, as we're seeing with Corona, as publications are cutting freelance budgets across the board, as editorial staffs are being gutted, we're seeing this emergence of journalist-centered newsletters, right? We're seeing people really being able to produce editorial content that doesn't have to be kind of filtered through the agenda of whatever publication or tied to something, right? You're getting real, true, authentic editorial content coming directly from the voice that you came to the publication to. So for me, it's definitely been a hybrid of having a lot of good like social media engagement, as well as maintaining a relationship with editors, one that is authentic. I'm very much a freelancer who asks for feedback. I know a lot of freelancers hate line edits, and at first I really used to, but I believe they give so much crucial feedback. And I'm a big person about networking horizontally and not vertically. I think one thing that I've really loved about being out here in the Bay is that the freelancer community is so unified. Where, for example, if my big bro Pendarvis can't cover something, he'll refer me. Or if I get something and I'm like, oh, you need someone who's born and raised, I know a group of people who can really tap into that lived experience, because I live in the Bay, but I'm not from the Bay, right? So I have to understand my positionality. I've been blessed to be able to write about like the emergent trends out here, but that's also because I took a step back whenever I moved out here to really sit and learn the culture and reach out to KQED, right? And reach out to people who are in the journalism community. So much of my media career has been from connections, social media engagement. I think right now, that really is going to be our saving grace, is working in solidarity with each other as freelancers, because something that this uprising has really brought out is about how anti-Black newsrooms are, the need for unions, and the need for us to stand in solidarity. So those would be my recommendations to anyone really trying to get into this freelance work: is find your people, invest in each other, and build together.
Yeah, I think networking is a really big part of it, and keeping those networks strong so that no matter what, you never know who you might run into and who might you need to use again, or they might need you again. So I think keeping those strong connections is really important. Amir, for you, if you had any more to like tag on about the importance of networking or anything to like help build up your freelancing clientele.
Definitely. I definitely want to uplift what Taylor said about the Bay Area freelance community. Like, we hold each other down so well. It's it's unbelievable, really. Sometimes, like, there's like Pendarvis. Also, shout out to Pendarvis. He's got me a bunch of work. He's also
Shout
had
out.
me shoot for pieces that he has written. So just a great community member, a great guy all around. And with that said, there comes a point where it's not really about what you've done, but what kind of person you are as well. So the people that you end up connecting with and that will get you work will want to work with you. One thing I learned in filmmaking, and actually being a videographer and being into film, is that working on sets, people want to work with people they like. They want to work with people they get along with, that are simple. to communicate with. Like, you don't cause any problems. So with that said, there's a character thing about working with people in as a freelancer, and you can easily get recommended for just being a great character, but not being great at what you do. Like, I've seen it a ton of times, and even being new to it, at a point was me still being brought on because someone recommended me and was like, "Oh, he's a great guy," or like, "He's to work with, he's learns great," or whatever, and then they'll bring me on. So definitely, there's a character component to it, and also, again, with reaching out to like networking, I've cold emailed a bunch of people, and some that really hit for me was a web series called The North Pole Show. I think I had only heard about them the day before I wrote them, and I was like, "Hey," I was trying to get into more filmmaking. I was like, "Hey, what are you guys doing? I saw this first season; it was great." And come to find out, one of the producers wrote back to me and he was like, "Oh, we're actually shooting season 2 right now, and we're looking for people to be on our team." So I met with them and we talked, and then we had a bunch of mutuals, and I was like, "Wow, like this probably couldn't happen somewhere else." I don't know. I haven't lived anywhere else. I don't know how things move so specifically, but I think being in this group of like-minded, we kind of have this air in the Bay Area about like what type of work we make, what the politics are, and when you move with that as well, I think there's oh, you're one of us. Like, let's bring you on to more, and then you do the work, and then they bring you on and to more, and they recommend you to more. So definitely a continuation of being a good character and being someone who shows up and does the work, and so that's about work. And also, I want to reference when I was working in advertising that we
Mhm.
did have a network of people that we hired as freelancers, and pulling my friends into that too has also helped with maintaining relationships with people and maintaining relationships with people that I've been staffed with as well. Because often in the Bay Area, we might be freelancers, but we might also have like a regular day job, right? So it's kind of a dual thing. And then so you might both work at a coffee shop, but you might both be people who work in the arts, and you can like easily recommend this person next to you by mentioning, "Hey, I do photography," and it's like, "Oh, well, a friend of mine's getting married; they need a photographer. Do you do wedding photography?" Yeah, so that happens also a lot. Just when I'm in spaces that aren't necessarily media oriented, when I just talk about myself or we talk about what we do, um, they'll recommend me just off GP that, "Oh, I met this dude, he seems cool," and then I get the job, and it'll be as simple as that. So really, a big shout out to the Bay Area freelance community and just the community at large, wanting to put each other on because we we love what we do, and there's a aspect that it's beyond making money and it's beyond the capital um, for it as well. It's just a love for the work, and I think that emphasizes how we're able to make connections and how we're able to put what matters to us most into the work and how we share the work with others as well.
Most definitely. And I know for a lot of creatives, myself included, like starting out, I'm not freelancing, but networking can be a very daunting thing to people. Like actually just opening up their laptop and cold emailing a company or another production like company in the area. So, Amir, if you would have any like advice on how to network and how to get people, I guess, out of their shell and just be able to create that community.
Ooh, um, okay. No, I have an answer. It's hard. I'm just gonna start with that. It's hard. I'm still working on
Mhm.
it. I'm not I'm not the most out loud person. So already starting with that, it's going to network events often feels like a chore. And it feels like a chore because you're going there with capital in mind, like social capital. Like, I want to come here to just meet people that can do things for me or that can get me work. But I find when I go to the ones like Baycat, there's people there that I'm familiar with. There's people there that I see in the community. It's like, oh, it's not like that serious. It's not me trying to get my next job by pandering to somebody and acting like, oh, like I'm available. Oh, just looking, and just doing that whole thing. But elevator pitches matter, 30 seconds or less if you can. And the networking thing just helps with, or it helps with networking to know like what you're doing and what your goal is. And again, I want to emphasize the elevator pitch because nobody wants to talk in this loud room for 20 minutes and you trying to get off what you're saying and you right here in the face and they just don't want to hear you no more. And they're not even listening to what you're saying anymore. So keep it short, practice if you can beforehand, and be honest. Like, don't go in there looking for a job. Just go in there try to be you, and stuff will come.
Taylor, do you have anything to tag on with that?
Yeah, I know we're going towards the end, but 3 words: shoot your shot. Shoot your shot.
Yes.
It has been the most helpful advice. Apply it to any life situation, but specifically in the field of journalism. I think if anyone's like heard from my experience is that I didn't take into account when I tweeted at the editor in chief that I was 19, didn't go to J school, was an undergrad, the farthest away from New York City and what the perception of what a journalist should be. But I just really trusted in myself and my vision. I think something Amir said was that confidence, right? If you walk in with that confidence, or in my field of journalism where I have to pitch so much, I think do nothing without intention. So when you're making that networking that conversation, that email, if you're meeting up in person, shoot your shot with confidence and know that you gave 110%. It may not result into a job opportunity now, but I've had so many editors who have passed on pitches in the past that have come back later or referred me to another publication that has secured me a job. So, as we say in the South, shoot your shot with confidence, shorty. You never know what you're going to get. Never know.
That's good. And also, I know there was a few viewer submitted questions, and I think we have probably enough time for probably one or two. So 2 questions. And so one that is a common theme that we kind of haven't really touched on yet is the financial aspect of becoming a freelancer, and how, like, I'm going to be 26 next week. I know the struggle of health insurance about to come up. And so, like, just how to adjust to that lifestyle and like some of the personal like sacrifices or budgeting that you had to do to make that happen. Taylor, we can start with you.
Yeah, I think yes, health insurance is a burden. Kaiser, if you can. I think for me, what I wish someone would have told me is that if you're a freelancer, every gig you get, save 30% of your rate for taxes. If you're a full-time freelancer, start enrolling in quarterly taxes instead of doing the traditional paying taxes in April, because you were going to get a nice large number from the IRS. And I think transitioning to a full-time freelancer has really made me evaluate what I need to live. So I do reserve space for those sweet things like my tattoos and getting my hair done. But also, if you're freelancing paycheck to paycheck, at least have enough in your savings for a payment of net 30, which is 1 month, or net 60, because net 30 is the standard. So at least always have, if you can, 1 to 2 months rent, because freelance checks don't always come automatically. And if you're finding problem getting payment, tap in with your local freelancer union. I'm part of International World Workers and National Association of Black Journalists. So make sure you can find some infrastructure and backup, because freelancers do get exploited by these corporations, but we are entitled to rights.
Amir, did you have anything to add on to help these freelancers out?
Yeah, if you're starting out, it's easy to use like all your birth record, all your initial information you get when you're born. And I would highly suggest as a freelancer, getting an EIN number, employee identification number. So you don't have to put your social security out there. Eventually you will get W-9s. They'll ask you to put your name and your phone number and address and all this stuff. That's just for tax purposes for them and for you. And when you get to that point, you want to start utilizing what business tendencies like we have in this country that allow people to be businesses as freelancers, just to protect yourself. And I've been trying to get into the quarterly taxes. I still haven't done it, so I'll be looking at that yearly at the end of the year. It's like, boy, but what I did start doing, as a photographer, as a filmmaker, equipment is a big part of what I do. And buying equipment used to be like almost a hobby. Like I would, instead of renting equipment, I would just buy it outright. Not because I'm flossing, but it because it would just be something I was already looking into and saving for. And then if I didn't like it, I would sell it, or I would use it for the gig and I would sell it if I didn't like it. And if I liked it, I would keep it. But what I didn't do until only a couple years ago was um, itemize it, write it down, and then once I do my taxes, I can write it off as a deduction. And then I went from negative to positive. So now I'm chilling. Now it's like, okay, oh yeah, April, yeah, bring it, come on, bring April. Um, but yeah, so that definitely helped a lot, and being really being on the ball with that, because it's easy to get lost in like Amazon purchases and your emails get, my email for my Amazon looks crazy, and it's important to keep those on the side, even if you're going to an event to shoot, like bill the Uber or sign up for, I think they have business accounts on Uber where you can have a separate account and you can log all your rides on there. So at the end of the year, you can deduct it and you get the money back. So you don't have to, look at some negative number when it comes time to prepare your taxes. So I would suggest that, and also paperwork, print all the stuff, because you can get a nice check back, and then IRS will be like, oh, okay, that's what you got. Yeah, let me see them papers, and you don't have them. Sorry. So yeah, definitely keep prints. If you can get like some organizing thing, it might seem like tedious right now because you might be starting out and you think, oh, this is just one, you know, paper. I'm not gonna need like organization. I'm not gonna need folders, but I go through that stuff so often. It's helped extremely that I kept it over the
Mhm.
years.
Yes, that's awesome financial advice. I'm going to be taking note of it as well. But as we're wrapping up, I do want to leave everybody with one piece of advice that you would give fellow freelancers, because I know it's a very trying time right now. Mental health is like something that we really need to take into account. So, just one piece of advice that you would give a fellow freelancer to be able to get through it and thrive in their career. And we can start with off of Taylor.
Yeah, I think what I like to leave everyone on is don't write or produce content out of the fear of scarcity, because it's going to reflect in your work, um, and your work is everything to you. So if you are in a financial burden, and I completely understand and feel like you can't say no, um, recognize that you have power, because corporations will try to make sure that freelancers don't have power. So write everything with attention and don't write out of scarcity.
Thank you, Taylor and Amir.
To leave everyone, I would say don't be afraid to pivot or adapt to the times. Like I mentioned with documentary, like I've been doing that, and I've been doing other types of work with creative as well. But now that we're back, or now that we're in this, pandemic, it actually made me adjust kind of what I was doing and how I was doing it. And a lot of my work as of late that I've been getting gigs for is documentation for what's going on. And now I have to be more informed on uh, what the protests are about and the history of cities I've never been to, and just the needs of right now. So if you're doing work for right now, um, don't be afraid to shift in what that work might look like, what it's about. If you have your core values, like keep them that way, but don't be afraid to shift or pivot in, a different topic, or how you want to present media that can tell the story of what core values that you have.
Awesome. Thank you both for joining us this evening and giving a little bit more insight on how to be a multi-hyphenated creator in this current day and age. And if you had anything to promote your social so that everybody can keep up with you and keep that network strong and be able to possibly work with you guys in the future.
Yeah, so everyone, I am Taylor Crumpton, the hot girl journalist, also known as Shea Brother Taylor on Twitter. So everything's real simple, at Taylor Crumpton. Follow me for a good old Southern time.
Hey, Amir.
My Instagram is Amir X Aziz. I'm not Amir Aziz, the other guy. Amir X Aziz on Instagram, on Twitter, Asiatic Black, AZIATIC Black. Town business, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you both again. And that about wraps it up this evening. And thank you to everyone for tuning in to the Multi-hyphenated Working as a Creative Freelancer panel. I would also like to take this time to thank our sponsor, a producer level sponsor, again, Dolby Laboratories, for sponsoring us for this In Focus event. And also, if you haven't signed up already, make sure to tune in tomorrow at 7:30 PST for day 3 of In Focus. And tomorrow is going to be talking about women directors, and it'll be a fireside chat. And make sure that you sign up for that. And I just want to say thank you again to Baycat for allowing me to host this evening. It's been such a pleasure. And with that, I want to say good night. Hope you guys have a great day.
Good night, you too.
Bye, y'all.